Sandra Johnson was having a good day until she rolled her wheelchair through the heavy glass doors of First National Bank. The autumn sun warmed her back as she navigated the smooth marble floor, her well-worn leather briefcase balanced on her lap. At 52, Sandra had built a reputation in the community as someone who didn't take no for an answer. After a successful career in banking, a car accident 3 years ago had changed her physical circumstances but not her determined spirit. Today's visit should have been routine. Sandra needed to sort out some paperwork for her small business account, the nonprofit she'd founded to help underprivileged youth learn financial literacy. She'd made an appointment and brought all her documentation, just as she always did. The bank was busy that Thursday morning. People stood in lines, the soft murmur of conversation mixing with the clicking of computer keyboards. Sandra took a moment to straighten her crisp blue blazer before approaching the available teller window. "Next customer, please," called a voice from the third window. Sandra wheeled herself over, offering a polite smile to the woman behind the counter. The name tag read Melissa Carter. The teller was in her mid-30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," Sandra said, placing her ID and bank card on the counter. "I have an appointment to discuss some issues with my business account." Melissa glanced at Sandra, then looked past her, scanning the lobby as if expecting someone else to step forward. When no one did, her gaze reluctantly returned to Sandra. "Is your caretaker with you today?" Melissa asked, her voice unnaturally loud. Sandra's smile didn't waver, though something cold settled in her stomach. "I don't have a caretaker. I'm here on my own to discuss my business account." She pushed her ID card forward. "I have an appointment with Mr. Thompson at 10:30. Melissa picked up the ID with her fingertips, examining it as if it might be counterfeit. "And you're Sandra Johnson?" The way she said it suggested doubt. "Yes, that's correct." Sandra maintained her professional tone, though she noticed a few nearby customers glancing their way. Instead of processing her request, Melissa turned to her computer, typing with deliberate slowness. The seconds stretched uncomfortably. "Is there a problem?" Sandra finally asked. "Well," Melissa said with a sigh that suggested inconvenience, "there seem to be some special procedures we need to follow for your type of account." Sandra had been banking here for 15 years. There were no special procedures. "My type of account? I've had this business account for 3 years without any issues." "What specifically is the problem?" A young man in the next line over was now openly watching the interaction, his brow furrowed in concern. "We just need to be extra careful these days," Melissa said loudly, shuffling papers. "Fraud is becoming more common, you understand, especially with certain clients." The implication hung in the air. Sandra felt heat rising to her face, not from embarrassment but from a slow-building anger she was carefully controlling. She'd faced this kind of treatment before, both as a black woman and as someone in a wheelchair. The double discrimination wasn't new, but it still stung every time. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please," Sandra said firmly, maintaining eye contact. Melissa's smile tightened. "He's very busy at the moment. Perhaps you'd like to come back another day, maybe with someone who can help you understand the paperwork." A few feet away, an elderly white man was being processed quickly by another teller, his transaction completed with friendly efficiency, despite him having forgotten his ID. Sandra noticed this, as did several other customers who were now watching the interaction with growing discomfort. "My understanding of banking paperwork is quite thorough," Sandra replied evenly. "I worked in financial services for 25 years. I'll wait for your manager." Melissa's eyebrows rose slightly at this information, but her demeanor didn't change. "If you insist." She picked up her phone with obvious reluctance. While Melissa spoke quietly into the phone, Sandra discreetly took out her own phone and placed it on her lap, pressing the record button. Georgia was a one-party consent state for recordings, and Sandra's instincts told her this might be important to document. "Mr. Thompson will be with you shortly," Melissa announced, still not making eye contact. "You can wait over there." She gestured toward a row of chairs in the corner far from the counter. "Thank you, but I'll wait here until he arrives," Sandra replied calmly. She had learned long ago that maintaining her ground was sometimes necessary. "Since I have an appointment, it shouldn't be long." Melissa's face flushed slightly. She began loudly organizing papers, occasionally glancing at Sandra with barely disguised irritation. A young black woman in line watched this exchange with growing concern. She caught Sandra's eye and gave her a small nod of solidarity. Sandra nodded back, grateful for the silent support. After several uncomfortable minutes, a door opened and Robert Thompson emerged. The branch manager was a tall man in his 40s with a worried expression that suggested Melissa had painted quite a picture over the phone. "Mrs. Johnson?" He approached the counter, looking between Sandra and Melissa. "Is there an issue I can help with today?" Before Sandra could answer, Melissa jumped in. "She's trying to access business account information, but I'm not sure she's authorized. And she's been quite difficult about our security procedures." Several customers visibly reacted to this blatant mischaracterization. The young man who had been watching earlier actually took a step forward, as if about to speak up. "That's not accurate," Sandra said, her voice steady but firm. "I have an appointment with you regarding my business account. Ms. Carter here seemed reluctant to verify my identity, despite my providing proper identification. She suggested I return with a caretaker, who could help me understand the paperwork." Thompson's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Melissa, who was already shaking her head in denial. "I simply suggested that someone might help her with the complex forms," Melissa said defensively. "Given her situation." "My situation being what exactly?" Sandra asked, looking directly at Melissa. The bank had grown quieter. Even the security guard by the door was watching now. Melissa flustered, arranging papers needlessly. "Well, you know, the forms can be difficult for some people to understand." "Some people like me?" Sandra pressed. "A black woman in a wheelchair? Or former bank executives who run their own financial literacy nonprofits?" Thompson's face paled. "Mrs. Johnson, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I know exactly who you are. We've been looking forward to our meeting about the community workshop your organization is planning." Now it was Melissa's turn to look surprised. Her eyes darted between Sandra and her manager. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office," Thompson suggested, already moving to open the side gate that would allow Sandra's wheelchair to pass through to the staff area. "Actually," Sandra said clearly, "I think it's important that we acknowledge what just happened here. Ms. Carter made assumptions about me based on how I look, not on who I am. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was discrimination. And based on the reactions of your other customers, I'm not the only one who noticed." Several people in line nodded in agreement. The young man who had been watching spoke up. "I saw the whole thing. The lady is right." Thompson looked around the bank lobby, now acutely aware that this had become a public relations nightmare unfolding in real time. "Mrs. Johnson, please, let's discuss this privately." Sandra placed her phone back in her purse, the recording safely stopped and saved. "I've been banking here for 15 years, Mr. Thompson. I've never been treated this way before today. I'd still like to have our scheduled meeting, but afterward I'll need to file a formal complaint about this incident." Melissa's face had lost all color. "You don't understand," she began, but Thompson cut her off with a sharp look. "We value all our customers, Mrs. Johnson," he said emphatically. "Please let me escort you to my office and we can sort this out properly." As Sandra followed Thompson toward his office, she caught the eye of the young black woman who had nodded to her earlier. The woman gave her a small thumbs up of encouragement. An elderly customer whispered something to his companion, shaking his head in disapproval at what they had witnessed. Sandra took a deep breath as she entered Thompson's office, her heart still racing from the confrontation. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged, dismissed, or humiliated based on appearances. She placed her briefcase on her lap, feeling the weight of the moment. The truth was about to come out. And for Melissa Carter, it would change everything. The bank lobby fell into an uncomfortable silence after Sandra and Mr. Thompson disappeared into his office. Customers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disapproval. Melissa Carter stood rigid behind her counter, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She shuffled papers with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact with the line of customers still waiting for service. "Next customer," she called, her voice noticeably strained. A middle-aged woman stepped forward hesitantly. "Actually, I think I'll wait for another teller," she said, stepping out of line. Several others followed her lead, creating a longer queue at the neighboring windows. Inside Mr. Thompson's office, Sandra positioned her wheelchair across from his desk. The office was small but well appointed, with certificates hanging on the wall and family photos arranged neatly on a side table. Thompson closed the door and took a seat, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible concern. "Mrs. Johnson, I want to personally apologize for what happened out there," he began, straightening his tie nervously. "That's not how we treat our customers at First National." Sandra placed her phone on the desk between them. "I've recorded the interaction, Mr. Thompson. Not because I wanted to make trouble, but because, sadly, this isn't the first time something like this has happened to me, though never at this bank." Thompson nodded, his expression grave. "You have every right to document your experiences. What happened was unacceptable." "It wasn't just unacceptable," Sandra replied firmly. "It was discriminatory. Ms. Carter made assumptions about me based on my race and disability, not on my banking history or credentials." Thompson ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I understand, and I assure you we take these matters very seriously. We have strict policies against any form of discrimination. Policies are only as effective as the people who enforce them," Sandra pointed out. "I'm curious, has Ms. Carter had complaints filed against her before?" The manager's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "I can't discuss personnel matters," Thompson said carefully, "but I want you to know that this incident will be thoroughly investigated." Sandra leaned forward slightly. "I was coming here today to discuss hosting a financial literacy workshop at this branch, a partnership that would benefit both your bank and the community. But now I need to ask myself if this is the right environment for my organization." Thompson's eyes widened. "Please don't make that decision yet. What happened today was an anomaly, I assure you." Before Sandra could respond, a sharp knock sounded on the door. Without waiting for a response, Melissa pushed it open, her expression tense but determined. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson, but I think there's been a misunderstanding that I'd like to clear up," she said, pointedly avoiding looking at Sandra. Thompson's face darkened. "Melissa, we're in a private meeting. This isn't appropriate." "It will only take a moment," Melissa insisted. She finally turned to Sandra, her smile tight and artificial. "Mrs. Johnson, I think you misinterpreted my concerns. I was simply following our enhanced security protocols. It had nothing to do with your personal characteristics." Sandra met her gaze steadily. "Enhanced security protocols that weren't applied to the elderly white gentleman who forgot his ID entirely?" "Those protocols?" Melissa flinched. "That was different. He's a regular customer." "I've banked here for 15 years, Sandra replied calmly. "Longer than you've worked here, I suspect." "That's enough, Melissa," Thompson interrupted, standing up. "This is completely unprofessional. Please return to your station." "But she's twisting what happened," Melissa protested, her voice rising. "She's trying to make it seem like I'm racist or something." A tense silence filled the office. Sandra remained composed, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I didn't use that word," Sandra said quietly. "But your actions spoke volumes." Melissa's face contorted with anger. "You people always play the victim card." "I was just doing my job." Thompson's face paled at the outburst. "Melissa, that's enough. Leave my office immediately." The damage was done. Melissa's true colors had finally shown through her professional veneer, and in front of both a customer and her manager. She seemed to realize her mistake, her hand flying to her mouth. "I didn't mean," she started. "Go to the break room and wait for me there," Thompson ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. After Melissa left, closing the door harder than necessary, Thompson turned to Sandra with a mortified expression. "Mrs. Johnson, I cannot apologize enough for that inexcusable behavior." Sandra took a deep breath. "Unfortunately, Mr. Thompson, what just happened proved my point more effectively than any argument I could have made." Outside in the lobby, the tension was palpable. As Melissa stormed from Thompson's office to the break room, customers watched her pass. The young black woman who had shown Sandra solidarity earlier pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. The elderly man who had witnessed the original confrontation was speaking with another teller, gesturing animatedly toward the manager's office. Word was spreading. Back in the office, Thompson was desperately trying to salvage the situation. "Mrs. Johnson, I want to assure you that what you experienced today doesn't reflect our bank's values. I'll be addressing this immediately." "I appreciate that," Sandra said, but I need to know what concrete steps will be taken. This isn't just about me. It's about creating a banking environment where everyone is treated with respect. Thompson nodded earnestly. Of course. There will be consequences for Ms. Carter's behavior, and I'll be reviewing all our training procedures. But I hope you'll still consider partnering with us for your workshop. Your expertise would be invaluable to our community. Sandra considered his words carefully. The workshop was designed to help young people from underserved communities learn financial skills. Many of them would be people of color. Some might have disabilities. Would they all receive equal treatment here? They absolutely would, Thompson insisted. What happened today was an aberration, not our standard. As they continued their discussion, the bank lobby was becoming increasingly chaotic. A local reporter who happened to be in line during the initial confrontation had recognized Sandra from her community work. He was now quietly interviewing other customers who had witnessed the interaction. The young woman who had been typing on her phone had posted about the incident on social media, tagging Sandra's nonprofit organization. Within minutes, the post was being shared across multiple platforms, with comments flooding in from people sharing similar experiences at various businesses. Inside the break room, Melissa sat alone, alternating between anger and fear. She had worked at the bank for 7 years and had a spotless record, at least officially. There had been a few complaints over the years, but nothing that stuck. She had always been careful, keeping her comments subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. But today, she had slipped. The pressure had been building for weeks. The announcement about Sandra Johnson's organization potentially partnering with the bank had irritated Melissa from the start. She couldn't understand why they needed special programs for those communities when anyone could succeed. If they just worked hard enough, at least that's what she believed. When she saw Sandra wheel herself to her window, something inside Melissa had snapped, and now she feared her career was about to pay the price. Back in Thompson's office, Sandra was reviewing her options. She pulled out her business card and handed it to the manager. "I'm going to file a formal complaint with your corporate office," she said, not out of vindictiveness, but because accountability matters. "In the meantime, here's my card. Once you've addressed this situation internally, we can revisit the possibility of working together." Thompson accepted the card, looking both relieved and concerned. "Thank you for giving us that chance. May I ask, will you be making this public?" Sandra gestured toward the lobby beyond the office door. "I think that ship has sailed, Mr. Thompson. Look outside." Thompson rose and peered through the window blinds. The lobby was buzzing with activity. The local reporter was still collecting statements, and several customers had their phones out, likely sharing the story on social media. The bank's security guard was trying to maintain order as more people entered, having heard about the incident from friends or social media. "This isn't just about one incident or one employee," Sandra explained gently. "When something like this happens in a public place, it touches a nerve for many people who've experienced similar treatment. It becomes bigger than any of us." Thompson turned back to her, his expression grave. "What can I do to make this right?" "Start by taking discrimination complaints seriously," Sandra replied. "Create real consequences for behaviors like we saw today. And maybe, when the dust settles, we can work together to create training that addresses these issues head-on." As Sandra prepared to leave the office, she gathered her belongings and adjusted her position in her wheelchair. The weight of what had happened and what was still unfolding settled on her shoulders. She hadn't come looking for conflict, but sometimes change only came through difficult moments of truth. Outside, people were waiting to hear her side of the story. The young woman who had supported her silently earlier was now standing by the door, ready to offer assistance if needed. The elderly customer who had witnessed everything was telling anyone who would listen about the brave woman in the wheelchair who stood up to discrimination. The truth was spreading, and for Melissa Carter, the consequences were just beginning. Her career, built on a foundation of hidden biases and selective treatment, was about to crumble in the face of undeniable evidence and public scrutiny. Sandra took a deep breath and wheeled toward the door, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, Sandra woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. She reached for it with bleary eyes, surprised to see dozens of notifications flooding her screen. Messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers filled her inbox. Her social media accounts had exploded. "Overnight, what in the world?" she muttered, sitting up in bed and pushing her braids away from her face. She clicked on the first news alert and nearly dropped her phone. There on the screen was a headline: Discrimination at First National. Former banking executive faces prejudice. Below it was a photo of the bank's exterior. Sandra scrolled through the article with growing disbelief. The reporter who had been in the bank yesterday had written a detailed account of what happened, including quotes from multiple witnesses. The story had been picked up by local news outlets and was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. With shaking hands, she called her friend and business partner, Darlene. "Have you seen the news?" Darlene asked immediately upon answering. "I'm looking at it right now," Sandra replied. "How did this happen so fast?" "Someone posted a video," Darlene explained. Not of the initial confrontation, but of Melissa storming out of the manager's office. You can hear her saying some pretty awful things. It's gone viral. Sandra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had wanted accountability, but not this kind of public spectacle. "This isn't what I intended." "I know," Darlene said gently, "but sometimes these things take on a life of their own. People are tired of staying silent about discrimination. Your story resonated with a lot of folks." After hanging up, Sandra got ready for the day with unusual care. She chose a professional outfit, a deep purple blouse and black pants that were comfortable in her wheelchair but still conveyed authority. Today would be about taking control of the narrative. By mid-morning, Sandra had received calls from 3 more news outlets seeking comments. She declined them all, preferring to focus on the official complaint she was preparing for the bank's corporate headquarters. As she typed, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she spotted a delivery person holding an enormous flower arrangement. She opened the door, confused. "Sandra Johnson?" the delivery person asked. "That's me. These are for you. There's a card." After signing for the delivery, Sandra placed the elaborate arrangement of lilies and orchids on her dining table and opened the small envelope tucked among the blooms. "Mrs. Johnson," the note read, "please accept my sincere apologies for yesterday's incident. I've taken immediate action and would appreciate the opportunity to discuss next steps. Respectfully, Robert Thompson." Sandra set the card aside, her feelings mixed. The flowers were a nice gesture, but real change required more than bouquets and apologies. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Sandra Johnson speaking." "Mrs. Johnson, this is Patricia Wang, Executive Vice President at First National's corporate office." Sandra straightened in her wheelchair. "Ms. Wang, I was actually in the process of preparing a formal complaint to send to your office." "That's precisely why I'm calling," Patricia replied, her tone professional but concerned. "We've already received multiple reports about yesterday's incident, including security footage. I wanted to speak with you directly before this escalates further." "I appreciate that," Sandra said cautiously. "What happened to you was completely unacceptable," Patricia continued. "I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. Ms. Carter has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." "I'm glad to hear that," Sandra replied. "But I have to ask, have there been previous complaints about her behavior?" A pause. "I can't discuss specific personnel matters, but I can tell you that we're reviewing all customer interactions Ms. Carter has had over the past year." "That's a start," Sandra acknowledged. "But this isn't just about one employee. It's about corporate culture and training." "Absolutely," Patricia agreed quickly. "That's another reason I wanted to speak with you. Given your background in banking and your current work in financial literacy, we would value your input on how we can improve." Sandra hadn't expected this turn of events. "Are you offering me a consulting role?" "Essentially, yes. We'd like to bring you on as a special advisor to help us evaluate and enhance our diversity training and customer service protocols." The offer was tempting, but Sandra needed time to consider the implications. "I'll need to think about that, Ms. Wang. My primary concern right now is ensuring that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." "Of course. Take your time," Patricia said. "In the meantime, we'd still like to move forward with hosting your financial literacy workshop if you're willing. We believe it's more important than ever to demonstrate our commitment to serving all community members." After ending the call, Sandra sat quietly, processing the rapid developments. What had started as a routine bank visit had morphed into something much larger than herself. The incident had clearly touched a nerve in the community, exposing tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface. Around noon, Sandra's doorbell rang again. This time it was Darlene, carrying takeout bags from their favorite deli. "Thought you might need lunch and a friendly face," Darlene said, sweeping into the apartment. At 55, Darlene was a force of nature, a retired teacher with boundless energy who helped run their nonprofit. "You're a lifesaver," Sandra admitted. Wheeling into the kitchen to get plates, as they ate, Darlene updated Sandra on the community response. "The phone at the office hasn't stopped ringing. People want to know if we're going to organize some kind of protest." Sandra shook her head firmly. "That's not what our organization is about. We're educators, not activists. Sometimes those lines blur," Darlene pointed out, "especially when it's personal." "I know," Sandra sighed. "But I want to be thoughtful about this. Corporate called this morning. They want to hire me as a consultant to help revamp their diversity training." Darlene raised an eyebrow. "Damage control?" "Partly, I'm sure. But it could be an opportunity to create real change from within." "What about Melissa?" Darlene asked. "Any word on what's happening with her?" "Administrative leave for now. There's apparently an investigation underway." Meanwhile, across town, Melissa Carter sat in her small apartment, blinds drawn against the morning sun. Her phone had been buzzing too, but with very different messages. Friends and family wanting to know if the woman in the news stories was really her. Colleagues sending links to the viral video and asking for her side of the story. She'd made the mistake of checking social media earlier and found herself the target of intense criticism. Some people were even calling for her firing. The bank had instructed her not to speak publicly about the incident, but staying silent while her reputation crumbled was excruciating. Melissa paced her living room, alternating between anger and fear. This wasn't fair. Her words had been taken out of context. She wasn't a racist, she had black friends, didn't she? This was all being blown out of proportion by people looking to be offended. Deep down, though, a small voice whispered uncomfortable truths. She had treated Sandra differently. She had made assumptions based on appearance. And when confronted, she had said things she couldn't take back. Her phone rang, her mother calling for the third time that day. Melissa let it go to voicemail. How could she explain something she was still struggling to understand herself? Back at Sandra's apartment, the afternoon brought more developments. An email arrived from Robert Thompson with the subject line, "Internal Investigation Update." "Dear Mrs. Johnson," it read, "I wanted to inform you that our review of security footage and witness statements has been completed. Additionally, we've discovered several previous customer complaints regarding Ms. Carter that were not properly documented or addressed. I take personal responsibility for this oversight. We're implementing immediate changes to our complaint reporting system. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss this with you in person when you feel ready." Sandra forwarded the email to Darlene with a simple note. Progress? As evening approached, Sandra finally decided to face the public response. She opened her laptop and navigated to her organization's social media pages. The comment section was overflowing with messages of support. "Thank you for standing up. This happened to my mother last year at a different bank. Your courage gives others strength to speak out. This isn't just about one incident, it's about the everyday discrimination people like us face." Reading these messages brought tears to Sandra's eyes. What happened to her had clearly struck a chord with many others who had faced similar treatment, but perhaps lacked the platform or resources to fight back. With careful consideration, Sandra composed a public statement, focusing not on vilifying Melissa or the bank, but on the broader issues at play and the opportunity for positive change. "What happened at First National Bank was unfortunately not unusual," she wrote. "Many people face subtle and not so subtle discrimination every day. The difference this time was that it was witnessed, recorded, and exposed. I'm encouraged by the bank's swift response and commitment to improvement. My hope is that this incident becomes a catalyst for change, not just at one bank but in how we treat each other as human beings. Let's channel our energy into education and growth, not division and anger." She hit post and wheeled away from her computer, emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The truth was out there now, making its way through the community and beyond. For Melissa Carter, it meant the likely end of her banking career. For First National, it meant a painful but necessary examination of their practices. And for Sandra, it meant an unexpected opportunity to create meaningful change from a position of influence rather than victimhood. The investigation was just beginning, But already the truth was accomplishing what confrontation alone could not, creating consequences for discrimination and opening doors for genuine transformation. 3 days after the incident, the morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of Sandra's home office as she reviewed the detailed email from First National Bank's corporate investigation team. The formal report contained findings that even she hadn't anticipated. She adjusted her reading glasses, focusing intently on the screen before her. The internal investigation had unearthed a pattern that went beyond Melissa's treatment of Sandra. Over the past 3 years, there had been 7 formal complaints filed against Melissa for customer service issues. Looking deeper, the investigators found that all 7 complainants were either people of color, elderly customers, or individuals with disabilities. None of these complaints had resulted in disciplinary action. Good Lord, Sandra whispered to herself, scrolling through the document. Most disturbing was an email chain discovered between Melissa and another teller who had since left the bank. The messages contained derogatory comments about certain customers, including remarks about wheelchair people taking forever, and why do they always cash such small checks? The language grew increasingly inappropriate, revealing biases that should have been addressed long ago. Sandra's phone rang, interrupting her reading. It was Darlene. Have you seen the news? Darlene asked without preamble. I'm going through the investigation report, Sandra replied. What news? Turn on Channel 8. They're doing a live report outside First National's headquarters right now. Sandra wheeled quickly to her living room and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered to life, showing a reporter standing outside the imposing glass headquarters of First National Bank. Behind her, a small but vocal group of protesters held signs reading, "Bank for All and Accountability." Now the controversy surrounding a local branch of First National Bank continues to grow, the reporter was saying. What began as a single incident has sparked a larger conversation about discriminatory practices in banking. We've learned exclusively that the bank has terminated the employment of Melissa Carter, the teller at the center of this controversy. Sandra sat back in her wheelchair, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected such swift and public action. The reporter continued, in a statement. First National said they have zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind and are committed to serving all community members with dignity and respect. Sources tell us that an internal investigation revealed previous complaints that had gone unaddressed. The camera panned to show more protesters gathering, their numbers growing as people arrive from nearby office buildings on their lunch breaks. A diverse group of individuals sharing stories, some holding up phones to show social media posts about the incident. Sandra turned down the volume and called Patricia Wang at corporate headquarters. I'm watching the news, Sandra said when Patricia answered. Is it true about Melissa? Yes, Patricia confirmed, her voice tense. The evidence was overwhelming. We had no choice but to terminate her employment, effective immediately. And the protests? Patricia sighed heavily. Those are unexpected. We issued what we thought was a strong statement, but it seems people want more than words. What they want is systemic change, Sandra explained. One termination doesn't address the underlying issues. Why were those previous complaints ignored? Who failed to take action? That's exactly why we need your help, Patricia replied. Our board is meeting tomorrow morning to discuss comprehensive reforms. They've asked if you would be willing to address them. Sandra hadn't anticipated being thrust into such a pivotal role so quickly. I'll need to think about that. After hanging up, Sandra sat quietly for several minutes, weighing her options. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Johnson, this is Tanya Williams from the bank branch. I was the teller in the window next to Melissa's. I have important information about previous incidents. Can we talk? Sandra stared at the message, her heartbeat quickening. This was unexpected. A potential whistleblower from inside the bank. She replied, arranging to meet Tanya at a coffee shop near her apartment that afternoon. Meanwhile, across town, Melissa Carter sat in her car in the parking lot of her apartment complex, sobbing uncontrollably. Her termination had come via a phone call that morning, cold, formal, and final. 15 minutes later, her personal email had filled with hate messages as news of her firing spread online. Her phone rang. It was her mother again. Honey, please talk to me, her mother pleaded when Melissa finally answered. I'm worried sick about you. They fired me, Melissa choked out between sobs. My whole career is over. Come stay with us for a while, her mother suggested gently. Just until things calm down. Nothing is going to calm down, Melissa replied bitterly. I'm being painted as some kind of monster. People I've never even met are calling me terrible names online. My neighbor wouldn't even look at me in the hallway this morning. Have you thought about making a public apology? Her mother asked cautiously. Melissa wiped her eyes. What would be the point? No one wants to hear it. They've already decided I'm guilty. The point would be taking responsibility, her mother said firmly. If you made mistakes, and honey, it sounds like you did, then owning up to them is the first step toward making things right. The words hung in the air between them. Melissa had spent days blaming everyone else, Sandra for being too sensitive, the bank for throwing her under, the bus, the public for overreacting. But her mother's simple truth cut through her defenses. What if this was her fault? At 2 o'clock, Sandra arrived at the coffee shop, a cozy establishment with wide doorways that accommodated her wheelchair easily. She spotted a nervous-looking young woman sitting alone in the corner, constantly checking her phone. This had to be Tanya. Sandra ordered a tea and made her way over. Tanya? I'm Sandra Johnson. Tanya looked up, relief washing over her face. Thank you for meeting me. I've been struggling with whether to speak up. Take your time, Sandra said, positioning her wheelchair across from Tanya. Whatever you have to share stays between us unless you say otherwise. Tanya took a deep breath. I've worked at First National for 2 years. What happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. Melissa has a history of treating certain customers differently. The investigation mentioned several complaints, Sandra noted. There were more than what got reported, Tanya replied, lowering her voice. Most people don't formally complain, they just don't come back. They request a different teller next time. And management knew about this? Tanya fidgeted with her coffee cup. Mr. Thompson would tell us that customer service was a priority, but when specific issues came up involving, well, people who weren't white or able-bodied, he would brush them off as misunderstandings. Were other tellers behaving the same way? Sandra asked. Not to Melissa's extent, but the culture allowed it, Tanya explained. There's this unspoken thing, like some customers deserve more attention than others. I tried to treat everyone the same, but I never felt supported in that. Sandra took notes as Tanya continued, describing an environment where subtle discrimination was normalized and complaints were minimized. It painted a disturbing picture of systemic issues that went far beyond one prejudiced employee. Why are you telling me this? Sandra finally asked. You're risking your job. Tanya looked down at her hands. My grandmother uses a wheelchair. The way Melissa spoke to you, it made me think of how I'd feel if someone treated her that way. I stayed silent too long. Sandra reached across the table, squeezing Tanya's hand. Your courage matters. Would you be willing to share this information with the corporate investigation team? If it helps change things, yes, Tanya said, though her voice trembled slightly. When Sandra returned home that evening, she had made her decision. She would address the board meeting tomorrow, but on her own terms. This wasn't just about Melissa anymore. It was about changing a culture that enabled discrimination. She spent hours drafting her presentation, focusing on specific policy recommendations and accountability measures. Around midnight, she received another unexpected message, this time from Robert Thompson. Mrs. Johnson, I want to inform you that I've tendered my resignation as branch manager, effective immediately. My failure to address previous complaints makes me part of the problem. I hope this allows the bank to make a fresh start with new leadership committed to equality. Sandra read the message twice, surprised by this development. Thompson's resignation suggested the accountability was moving up the chain, a positive sign that the bank was taking the situation seriously. The next morning, Sandra dressed with care in a tailored navy suit, her most professional attire. Darlene arrived to drive her to First National's headquarters where the board meeting would take place. Are you nervous? Darlene asked as they approached the imposing building. Not nervous, Sandra replied, adjusting her position in the passenger seat. Determined. The boardroom was intimidating, all polished wood and leather chairs with the bank's logo prominently displayed on the wall. The 12 board members, mostly older white men in expensive suites. Tess watched with varying expressions as Sandra was helped to position her wheelchair at the head of the table. Patricia Wang made the introductions, then nodded to Sandra. "The floor is yours, Mrs. Johnson." Sandra looked around the room, making eye contact with each person before beginning. "Thank you for inviting me today. What happened at your branch last week has revealed deep-seated issues that go beyond one employee or one incident. I'm here because I believe First National has an opportunity to become a leader in inclusive banking, not just to repair your reputation, but because it's the right thing to do." She outlined her findings from both the official investigation and her conversation with Tanya, being careful not to reveal the teller's identity. Several board members shifted uncomfortably as she described the pattern of ignored complaints. "Your termination of Ms. Carter was necessary," Sandra continued, "but it's not sufficient. The problems are structural and require structural solutions." For the next 20 minutes, she presented her recommendations: mandatory diversity training for all employees, a new transparent system for tracking and addressing complaints, regular audits of customer treatment across different demographics, and the creation of a community advisory board to provide ongoing feedback. Finally, Sandra concluded, "I believe First National should make a public commitment to these changes, not a vague statement about doing better, but specific measurable goals with regular progress reports." A heavy silence fell over the room when she finished. The board chairman, an older gentleman named Walter Phillips, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson, your recommendations are extensive. Implementing all of this would require significant resources." "So does defending against discrimination lawsuits," Sandra replied evenly. "And the cost to your reputation from incidents like mine is incalculable." Another board member spoke up, a woman in her 60s. "I think Mrs. Johnson makes excellent points. This isn't just about avoiding negative publicity. It's about becoming the kind of institution we claim to be in our mission statement." The discussion continued for another hour, growing increasingly productive as more board members engaged with Sandra's ideas. By the end, they had unanimously approved a comprehensive reform package, with Sandra hired as a special consultant to oversee its implementation. As the meeting concluded, Chairman Phillips approached Sandra personally. "Mrs. Johnson, I want to thank you for your candor today. It would have been easier for you to simply sue the bank or join the protests outside. Your willingness to help us improve shows remarkable character." Sandra smiled slightly. "Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger. It's education and accountability." As Darlene drove her home, Sandra gazed out the window, watching the city streets pass by. What had begun as a humiliating experience had transformed into an unexpected opportunity to create meaningful change. And for Melissa Carter, whose prejudice had been exposed to the world, the truth had indeed ended her career, but perhaps it had also opened the door to some much-needed self-reflection. The real work was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the incident at First National Bank, and the autumn air carried a crispness that matched Sandra's mood as she wheeled herself toward the bank's main entrance. The building looked the same from the outside: tall glass windows, heavy doors, polished stone steps, but Sandra knew that much had changed within these walls. Today marked her final official visit as a consultant. For half a year, she had worked closely with the bank's leadership to implement the reforms they had promised. It had been exhausting, rewarding work that had consumed most of her time outside of running her nonprofit. As Sandra approached the entrance, she noticed a new addition: an automatic door opener with a large, clearly marked button at wheelchair height. It was a small change, but a meaningful one. She pressed it and watched with satisfaction as the door swung open smoothly. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," greeted the security guard, a new hire named Louis who always had a genuine smile for everyone who entered. "Big day today, isn't it?" "The biggest," Sandra agreed, returning his smile. "Is everyone gathered in the conference room?" "Yes, ma'am. They're waiting for you." Sandra made her way through the lobby, noting all the changes that had been implemented over the past 6 months. Brochures were now available in 6 different languages. A new seating area had chairs of varying heights to accommodate different needs. The teller counters had been redesigned with lowered sections that were accessible to wheelchair users. Even the lighting had been improved to make reading documents easier for those with visual impairments. But the most significant changes weren't physical. They were in the people. Sandra observed the interactions between staff and customers as she passed. Tellers were making eye contact with everyone, regardless of age or appearance. A young teller was patiently explaining a banking procedure to an elderly gentleman without talking down to him. Another was using a tablet to show a customer with limited English proficiency how to use the mobile banking app. Patricia Wang met Sandra outside the conference room, elegantly dressed in a crimson blazer and black pants. Over the months, their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship. "Ready for the final report?" Patricia asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sandra replied. "How does it feel on your end?" Patricia's expression was thoughtful, transformative, and I don't use that word lightly. They entered the conference room together. Inside, the board of directors was seated around the large table, along with regional managers from all 20 branches in the state. The company had decided to use Sandra's recommendations not just at the branch where the incident occurred, but throughout their entire operation. Chairman Phillips stood as Sandra entered. "Mrs. Johnson, thank you for joining us today. We're eager to hear your final assessment." Sandra positioned her wheelchair at the head of the table and placed her tablet in front of her. The room fell silent as she began. "6 months ago, I presented you with a comprehensive reform plan addressing the discriminatory practices that had been allowed to flourish within your organization. Today, I'm pleased to report that First National Bank has not only implemented these reforms, but has, in many areas, exceeded my expectations." She swiped through her presentation, highlighting key metrics. Customer satisfaction scores had increased by 27% across all demographics. Employee retention had improved, particularly among staff of color. Complaints about discriminatory treatment had decreased dramatically, and those that did occur were now addressed promptly and transparently. "Most importantly," Sandra continued, "you've created a culture where equality isn't just a corporate buzzword, it's embedded in how you do business every day." The presentation concluded with video. Testimonials from customers and employees, sharing their experiences with the new First National. One particularly moving clip featured Tanya, the young teller who had risked her job to speak up about the discriminatory culture. "I used to dread coming to work," Tanya admitted in the video. "I felt like I was part of a system that didn't treat people fairly. Now I'm proud to tell people where I work. We're making a difference in our community." When the lights came back on, several board members were visibly moved. Chairman Phillips cleared his throat before speaking. "Mrs. Johnson, when this incident first occurred, we saw it as a crisis to manage. You helped us see it as an opportunity to become better. On behalf of the entire board, I want to thank you for your guidance and accountability." The meeting concluded with the formal adoption of Sandra's reforms as permanent bank policy, to be reviewed and updated annually. As people began to disperse, Patricia pulled Sandra aside. "There's something else I thought you might want to see," she said, handing Sandra a letter. "This arrived at corporate headquarters yesterday." Sandra unfolded the paper and immediately recognized the name at the bottom. Melissa Carter. The letter was addressed to First National's board of directors with copies indicated for Sandra and several civil rights organizations. It read, "To whom it may concern. After much reflection and soul-searching, I am writing to formally apologize for my actions at First National Bank 6 months ago. My treatment of Mrs. Sandra Johnson was inexcusable and reflected prejudices I was unwilling to acknowledge at the time. Since losing my position, I have undergone extensive counseling and education on implicit bias and discrimination. I want to be clear that my termination was completely justified. While I cannot undo the hurt I caused, I am committed to learning from this experience and becoming a better person. I've enrolled in a diversity education program at the community college and am volunteering with organizations that serve people with disabilities. I do not expect forgiveness or reinstatement. I simply want to acknowledge my wrongdoing and express my sincere regret for the pain I caused Mrs. Johnson and the damage I did to the bank's reputation. The changes that have resulted from this incident are important and long overdue. Respectfully, Melissa Carter." Sandra read the letter twice, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. "This is unexpected. Do you think it's genuine?" Patricia asked. "It's impossible to know for certain," Sandra replied thoughtfully. "But it took courage to write this. That's something." Later that afternoon, Sandra met Darlene at their nonprofit's office to prepare for the evening's event. The small suite of rooms buzzed with activity as volunteers arranged chairs and set up refreshments. "Everything's ready for tonight," Darlene reported. "We're expecting about 70 people, including representatives from 3 other banks who want to implement similar programs. Sandra nodded, pleased but not surprised. The success of First National's transformation had attracted attention throughout the financial industry. What had begun as a single incident of discrimination had evolved into a model for institutional change. "Did you see the article in the Business Journal?" Darlene asked, showing Sandra her tablet. The headline read, "First National Sets New Standard for Inclusive Banking." Sandra skimmed the article, which detailed the bank's journey over the past 6 months and highlighted the positive impact on both customer satisfaction and the bottom line. Treating people with dignity and respect, it turned out, was also good for business. "They've come a long way," Sandra acknowledged. "So has Melissa, apparently," Darlene said, having read the letter Patricia had shared. "Do you believe her?" Sandra considered the question carefully. "I believe she's beginning to understand the impact of her actions. Whether that understanding leads to lasting change is up to her." "And what about you?" Darlene asked gently. "How do you feel about everything that's happened?" Sandra gazed out the window at the city skyline, gathering her thoughts. "When I wheeled into that bank 6 months ago, I was just trying to handle some paperwork. I never imagined becoming the catalyst for all this change." She turned back to Darlene, her expression resolute. "But if it had to be someone, I'm glad it was me. I had the resources, the knowledge, and the platform to make sure it didn't get swept under the rug like so many other incidents." At 7 o'clock, the community center auditorium was filled to capacity. Sandra took her place at the front of the room, facing an audience that included bank employees, community members, and representatives from other financial institutions interested in implementing similar reforms. "Welcome to the first workshop in our series on financial literacy and inclusive banking," Sandra began, her voice clear and confident. "Tonight, we're going to talk about how financial institutions can better serve all community members, regardless of race, ability, or economic status." As Sandra led the workshop, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation she had felt that day at First National had been transformed into empowerment, not just for herself, but for countless others who would benefit from the changes she had helped implement. In the audience, she spotted Patricia sitting next to Chairman Phillips. Several rows back was Tanya, who had recently been promoted to customer service manager. Even Robert Thompson was there. After his resignation, he had enrolled in a diversity leadership program and was now working as a consultant, helping other businesses improve their practices. Notably absent was Melissa Carter. Despite her apology letter, she hadn't reached out to attend the workshop. Sandra understood. Some journeys had to be taken in private before one was ready to face the public again. As the evening wound down and attendees lingered to network, Patricia approached Sandra with a small, wrapped package. "A token of our appreciation," she explained, handing it to Sandra. Inside was a beautiful crystal plaque engraved with the words, "To Sandra Johnson, whose courage transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for change, with gratitude from First National Bank." Sandra traced the words with her fingertips, suddenly emotional. "Thank you." "No," Patricia replied earnestly. "Thank you. You could have sued us, ruined our reputation, or simply walked away. Instead, you chose to help us become better. That's a rare kind of wisdom." Later that night, as Sandra prepared for bed, she placed the plaque on her nightstand next to a framed photo of her parents. Her father, who had faced discrimination throughout his life, had always told her, "Don't just fight the darkness, light a candle." She had done more than light a candle. She had sparked a flame that was spreading throughout an entire industry, illuminating dark corners where prejudice had long been allowed to flourish. As she drifted off to sleep, Sandra thought about Melissa Carter. The woman who had tried to humiliate her was now struggling to rebuild her own life. Her career in banking effectively over. The truth had indeed ended her career, but perhaps it had also given her something more valuable: the chance to confront her own biases and grow beyond them. Sometimes, Sandra reflected, the greatest victory wasn't in destroying your opponent, but in transforming the battlefield itself. The incident at First National would always be part of her story, but it would no longer be defined by humiliation and discrimination. Instead, it would be remembered as the beginning of something important, a moment when one woman in a wheelchair refused to be diminished and, in standing up for herself, created positive change for countless others. The truth had done its work, not just in ending one person's career, but in beginning a new chapter for an entire community.